Hello and welcome to Newsclick. Today we have with us Professor Aijaz Ahmad, and we'll discuss the fallout of the current negotiations that is going on between Russia and the United States. Aijaz, if we look at what has happened, it appears that America has pulled back from the brink. They're not going to bomb Syria as we were threatening earlier. How does it affect the situation on the ground in Syria? Because the chemical weapons in any case have not entered the war. So how do you see this affecting the war itself, the civil war that is going on?
My sense is, Prabir, that first of all, there's something very important that has happened, which is that Hezbollah, and it is said Irani Revolutionary Guards, entered the battle. Americans cooked up this thing about the chemical weapons and wanted to punish Syria and them for doing it. And they have not been able to.
Basically, what they said clearly, redressing the balance and degrading Assad's capabilities.
Right. But pretending as if it was just Assad. But yes. All right. Hezbollah went in, changed the balance of force. Neither Israel nor the United States could do anything about it. That is one achievement of this particular the Obama being forced to back off, number one. Secondly, I think the Russians have virtually said as clearly as it is possible to say in diplomatic world, that in lieu of the handing over of the chemical weapons, Syria and maybe others in the region, meaning Iran, will gain more strategic weapons. Third, he has said that it is impossible for Syria to hand over the chemical weapons unless it has assurances, security assurances. So the US has to concede, has to give security assurances. It will not take the form of written documents, but it will be assurances given to Russia and China.
So effectively, Assad's military balance, the military balance in Syria has shifted towards Assad, because all this means Assad will be free and his Hezbollah on the ground.
My sense is that they will also be, Americans, Saudis and so on, will be required to tone down weapons and this new influx of jihadis that was going into Syria. Toning down all of that will also be, I think, part of the agreement. So yes, it has been, it has changed the balance very much in the favor of Syria and Iran.
The second part of it, which is that Russia was really not a player for quite some time in the West Asia field. It has major strategic interest in the region. There is a port that it has over there, but it was really not for the last 20 years. It has not been considered a player. Russia coming back into the West Asia in a major way.
Well, some sources in Beirut are saying that the Russians said to the Americans bluntly that just as Israel is very important for you, Syria is very important for us, and on this we shall not concede. We shall try to find a compromise, but we shall not concede. So yes, coming into this region, but it is also, I think, not just the region of the Arab world, not only Syria and its environs. I think it gives a lot of assurances to Iran. I think now serious negotiations can begin both on the nuclear front and on the front of the lifting of the sanctions. Third, it will have profound consequences, I think, in Central Asia in the balance of power. And in that, both Russia and China will gain.
So overall
terms,
the strategic military situation, both in Syria as well as in the region, has gone against the United States and Israel, and particularly because they really did not have anything to bank themselves upon. It was really an aggression.
That is certainly at the problem for Mr. Obama was that he flippantly talked about this red line, chemical weapons being the red line, which no one really believed in, including his generals. Then he started talking about the level at which he wanted to do it. First it was, at various levels and so on. So he found himself actually isolated, I believe, both in the political and the military establishment. And you have this extraordinary situation in which not only the British Parliament, for the first time in 250 years, rejects Prime Minister's request for support for military action, but also, not since Woodrow Wilson in the 1920s, has the US Congress ever stopped a president in its tracks the way it stopped. This is the first defeat for the Israeli lobby in the Congress, which had just the week before threw in some 250 to 300 new lobbyists in Washington. So it also shows that if the military political elite of the United States do not unite behind the president, even the Israeli lobby can be overruled. But the international isolation of the United States was extraordinary.
That actually they had no allies this time in terms of what would be called the coalition, the willing. The numbers are far below what
none whatsoever. None whatsoever. I mean, France was threatening to do something or the other. The Germans openly reprimanded Spain for joining up in that kind of statement with Britain and France. They said they were going to do it. NATO, which claims the same head of NATO who had claimed that that intervention in Libya was a model intervention, now said NATO has nothing to do with Syria. The Secretary General of the United Nations says it will be lawful only if, meaning it's illegal. Lakhdar Brahimi says it is illegal. So the West and then all the BRICS countries united.
G20.
G20, and within that the BRICS spoke unitedly. So the isolation was remarkable. And it was really the isolation as much of Mr. Obama as it was of the United States as a country.
Last issue on Syria. The chemical weapons, what they're talking about, of course doesn't take into account that the Syrian chemical weapons were developed only as a counter to Israeli nuclear weapons. And Syria has said earlier also that we can remove new chemical weapons if you also sign the NPT and dismantle your nuclear weapons. So that's not happened. So there is one danger over there. And the second part of it is that this kind of security inspectors who have to come in, been given access, do you think there's a possibility of the Iraq scenario being repeated?
Look, first of all, whatever international team gets put in will be very much under the supervision of Russia and China. So in that sense, that cannot be repeated. It will take time. In this case, they actually exist. They're spread all over. You have to create an inventory, this, that, and the other, and so on. So it's a long-term process. Then, yes, it was a deterrent. They couldn't afford to have a nuclear bomb, so this was a cheap deterrent, so to speak. The Russian argument is that if they give up this, then they have to be given strategic weapons which will compensate for this, which will be as threatening to Israel as these chemical weapons were.
So protection in a different way, though not nuclear weapons or chemical weapons, but nevertheless protection. And because of the Russian presence, which will be definitely there, they have said P5, which means Russia and China will also have a presence in this. You do not think it can be twisted the way it has been?
Not in that way. In fact, I think what is going to happen is that the rhetoric over the the chemical weapon used by the Syrian state is going to die down.
Yeah, it was actually...
The one thing is that except for the White House, in fact, not even American intelligence agencies confirmed this. It was a propaganda ploy by them, no one else. Now they'll drop it. One last point, which is that it is said that this proposal came from the Iranis. after having developed it with Syria, but the proposal itself came from the Iranis. And one of the things Iranis have calculated is that the last war in Lebanon showed that even at that time, Hezbollah was able to fire rockets that were falling, So if both Syria and Hezbollah can have a more effective weaponry of that kind, then you actually don't need chemical weapons as a deterrent.
It's interesting you say that, because Hezbollah did not fire all the rockets they had, particularly the longer range ones which are capable of reaching Tel Aviv, because they did not want that level of escalation.
That's right. And now Iran itself has much more sophisticated versions of the same, the ones that they did not use. And Russians are going to give all kinds of weapons to both Syria and Israel. So that the strategic balance will also shift.
So overall terms, in spite of some misgivings on the issue regarding inspections and so on, overall terms, world has come back from a very dangerous situation, and Syria seems to be going down a path which may see the civil war die down sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. And the moral high ground that Assad now occupies, that in order to save the lives of my people, I conceded. This is a very popular decision inside Syria. People were fearing that hundreds of thousands of people will be killed, cities will be destroyed, etc., etc. And he says, it is my responsibility to save the lives of my people. So I have done it. We'll continue to fight. So moral high ground, strategic advantage, at the moment, victory. Imperialism is very strong. It will come up with other kind of crookery, of course. But at the moment, first time since Second World War, an American president wanted to launch a war, and he was prevented.
Thank you very much, Aijaz. We'll continue to follow West Asia closely, because things obviously are not going to die down with this, and we need to watch the aftermath carefully. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah.